Hello, happy day after Thanksgiving. Yesterday marked yet another holiday celebrated in the strange situation of a pandemic where we have to stay far away from the people that we normally celebrate with. A holiday when we more of us than at any other time of year gather with family in different cities, in different states. Most of us, I hope, were staying home and not traveling and not having meals with guests. Perhaps the one cold comfort of not being able to gather with our far-flung families on Thanksgiving this year is that we were spared the dreaded annual ordeal of figuring out how to get through a meal with people whom we love, but whose political views we might find abhorrent. This is the first year in a number of years that I haven't heard or people talking about or read opinion pieces about how to manage to get through the meal with family members you disagree with about politics. And yet we all, every day of our lives, interact with people at work, in social organizations, in shul, in synagogue, in school, with people we disagree with about politics. So what is it that is so especially uncomfortable about having those kinds of conflicts with a family member? Even a cursory familiarity with Torah tells us that intrafamilial conflict is both as old as humanity itself and that it is not something trivial. The result of conflicts among family members, most often but not exclusively siblings, range from exile to curses to enslavement to death. No wonder we all not all, most of us, many of us, look forward to sitting down with siblings, cousins, aunts and uncles who belong to an opposing political party with a feeling of dread. In Parshat Vayetze, tomorrow, we will read about the birth of 12 of Yaakov's 13 children. And this family, these children, are the first generation in the history of our people in which all the children managed to remain together as part of a single family unit within a single covenant and eventually grow together into a single nation. The story of our people really begins with Abraham, but Abraham had multiple children, and only Yitzchak inherited the covenant. His other children went off and founded other nations. They couldn't live together. And among Yitzchak's children, he had with Rivka, we read last week about how Yaakov arranged to keep both his father's blessing and the inheritance of the firstborn for himself, while Esav will go off and form his own people. But among the children of Yaakov, there are no banished children, there are no unblessed children, there are no disinherited children. Everyone is chosen, everyone is blessed, everyone inherits. This shift represents a fundamental tikkun, a corrective to the history of irreconcilable conflict among siblings that goes all the way back to the first siblings in the Torah, Cain and Hevel. What was it that allowed Yaakov's children to remain together when previous generations had failed to do so? Perhaps they learned from the example of their mothers. Rachel and Leah were very often in a position of rivalry. They competed to marry the same man, and then once they both married him, they competed for his affection, and they competed for who would have the most sons. However, unlike their cousins, their husband Yaakov and his brother Esav, whose conflict was absolute and escalated to the point that Yaakov and Esav couldn't even live in the same place, when the point at which Esav wanted to kill his brother Yaakov, not just wanted to, but was planning to, Rachel and Leah managed to live together, not only in the same place, but in the same household. And although their conflict was real, it seems Leah and Rachel maintained a deep love and care for one another. First of all, Leah and Lavan, her father, could not have successfully deceived Yaakov into marrying Leah when he thought he was marrying Rachel without Rachel's cooperation. It would have been a simple thing for Rachel, had she wanted to show up at the wedding and say, "Hey, Yaakov, that girl under the veil, it ain't me." Instead, according to the Midrash, Rachel actively helped Leah to deceive Yaakov, giving her secret signals that she and Yaakov had arranged between them. Rachel, in this, was not only a model of self-sacrifice, but of showing care for the well-being even of one's rival. To allow Leah to marry Yaakov, the righteous brother, and not have to marry Esav, the wicked brother, Rachel was willing to sacrifice herself for the good of her sister. And that care for the good of the other went both ways. When Leah became pregnant for the 7th time with a boy, at that point, Yaakov already had 11 sons. 6 from Leah, 2 from Bilhah, 2 from Zilpah, and 1 from Rachel. And according to the Midrash, Leah reasoned if her child were born a boy, he would be the last of the 12 tribes that were destined to come from Yaakov. And that would mean that Rachel would have only had 1 son. Leah then prayed to God to turn the fetus in her womb into a girl. God answered her prayer, and Leah gave birth to Yaakov's only daughter, Dinah, and Rachel was able to conceive and bear her 2nd son, Binyamin. The children of Yaakov, the 12 sons and 1 daughter, grew up with this example of their mothers struggling and competing fiercely with one another, and also looking out for one another's well-being when it mattered most. Yaakov's children understood then that rivalry and conflict are not incompatible with love and caring. Though their conflicts would turn quite serious and lead to prolonged estrangement, in the end, Yaakov's children were able to come back together. Spoiler alert, we'll read that in a few weeks, and find a way to live together as a family. We often think of pluralism as a new phenomenon in the Jewish world. perhaps a product of our encounter with the challenges of modernity, our desire to live in peace with our neighbors. But pluralism has been a part of our people's identity ever since this generation of the children of Yaakov. We are the heirs of 12 distinct tribes whose founders had distinct personalities, distinct values, distinct issues, and distinct flaws, and who, for all their differences, were able to come together to form a single nation. And we, as members of that nation, are called B'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel, the children of Yaakov, reflecting the fact that our nation's identity is defined by the fact that those children of Yaakov, Israel, figured out, eventually, after a lot of struggle, how to live together for all their conflicts and differences. This means that Jewish values, the values of the Jewish people, the people Israel, are the sum total of at least 12 distinct and often conflicting sets of values. That's one reason I wince whenever I hear someone say, Judaism believes, or the Jewish view on X is, the Jewish view is that there's usually more than one Jewish view about any given thing. People like to joke about this. They say if you have two Jews, you'll get three opinions. And that's true, not because we like to argue or we can't make our minds up. It's true because the capacity to hold and even make the case for conflicting points of view is at the heart of what it means to be Jewish, to be among the children of Israel. The heirs of these siblings who, for all their differences, figured out how to live together. That doesn't mean that anything goes, or that we always have to tolerate anyone's views about anything. Pluralism asserts that no single faction or no single ideology has a monopoly on truth or on morality. Pluralism does not claim that there's no such thing as falsehood or evil. There are conflicts which are absolute, which are black and white, that do not allow for two sides to live together harmoniously. We must not make peace with anti-Semitism, with racism, or other ideologies of hatred. At the same time, we have to be careful not to be too quick to brand anyone we disagree with as an enemy. Ironically, those who are the most quick to demonize their opponents and claim they're too dangerous to be tolerated are themselves the dangerous ones. An ideology that refuses to accommodate opposition is an ideology that cannot be accommodated. We must learn to distinguish between opponents and enemies, between those who do present an existential threat, and they exist, and those who challenge us, who we might think are wrong, whom we can fruitfully engage and argue with each other and work together at the same time around our common goals and common values, and whom at the end of the day we can show love and care for. Let's learn from the example of our ancestresses, Leah and Rachel, and their children, that opposition need not lead to enmity, that we can stand up for ourselves, that we can fight for what we believe in and still manage to live with, look out for, and even love those we disagree with. If we can do that, then we may even find ourselves looking forward to next year when, please God, the pandemic will be over and we can sit down at the Thanksgiving table with those relatives whose views we can't stand, and getting into that argument with them, secure in the knowledge that in spite of our differences, we can remain united in love. Shabbat Shalom.